I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Welcome everyone to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Christian PARENTI. He is a journalist and an economist. Welcome back, Christian. So nice to have you back on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
Awesome. So I want to get started with, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the 2024 election, but I do want to get started with a recent article from you from February where you said, will the left stand up to the deep state? And I want to dive in here on this paragraph where you start to mention the FBI. You said the Bureau has a history of targeting figures and groups it sees as real political threats. Dr. Martin Luther King, for example. But it also has a well-documented history of fabricating political enemies where none exist. Throughout its history, the FBI has used both real and concocted threats to expand its budgets, powers, and prerogatives. And I know you started off this article talking about the weaponization of the federal government. And I want to start off with that first. I have noticed, and I'm sure you noticed this too, that's why you wrote this article, I have noticed that when it comes to government agencies, the FBI, the CIA, it seems like the squad members or the so-called progressives that are in Congress, they are not willing. It seems like they're not willing to call out those government agencies. And now it seems like there are certain segments of the right that have taken that mantle, so to speak, like a Matt Gaetz, that are willing to call out the weaponization of the federal government. And I want to get your opinion. Why do you think that's happening? And what does that mean for the left in the future? Sure.
Well, I think it all is rooted in Trump derangement syndrome. And this is an idea that I guess, at first I didn't take that serious. Trying to figure out the deeper logic of stuff. But increasingly, I feel that people really do, on the left, suffer from a kind of derangement, a panic, a hysteria about this guy. And that is rooted in a lack of actually, critically appraising his record vis-a-vis the Biden administration, what you get from the Democrats. And ultimately, I think they're basically both bad. They're both awash. But, the fear is that Trump is an actual fascist, that democracy is at stake, and therefore all of these old concerns go out the window because there's an emergency, and the emergency never stops, even though Trump's now out of office. Right? The emergency requires circling the wagons and overlooking problematic facts, such as that the FBI very clearly had infiltrated the various right-wing street gangs that were involved in Charlottesville and in January 6th. And they had them so thoroughly penetrated that you then have to ask the question, well, wait a minute, why wasn't more done to prevent these horrific spectacles, particularly Charlottesville, right? It's like, that was a horrific, ended up in this like murder and injury of 19 people. But, in both cases, it's like, it's hard for me at least to believe that that it was merely oversight and bureaucratic incompetence that led to inadequate police response in the face of both these spectacles. Now, these spectacles play a very important role in the current political imagination. This is the horde that's being held back by the mainstream Democrats. Like, this is the threat that causes the left should just forget the fact that, wait a minute, if we allow the FBI to do this to anyone, they're also going to do it to us. And they mostly have done it historically to the left, right? So when there's a time like now where there's this committee on the weaponization of the federal government, right? And Republicans are in the lead on this. The Democrats are not cooperating and trying to actually bring some sanity and restraint to these police agencies, particularly the Bureau. Instead, they're actively defending the Bureau and its unaccountable rogue ways and attacking the Republicans. And that is because I think that, you know, the imagination of the left, from the center left on over, is hostage to this phantasmagoria that Trump is a fascist, and that we're really just, you know, a breath away from the collapse of democracy. And the great irony is that it's precisely that fear and the concessions made to the political center by the left that seem to be increasing actual authoritarianism at every level. I mean, this was particularly true around COVID, right? It's like, this is apolitical, this is surveillance, and the left does not want to deal with that. Is my internet connection dropping?
I think you broke up a little bit.
Okay. Hopefully it'll be okay. I think there was other.
I think you'll be okay. One thing I was going to add too is I think in history as well, we have to go back to, I know you mentioned MLK, but also the Black Panthers were also infiltrated by the FBI. And you would think more people in Congress would be willing to call this out. And what's dangerous about this, when you have people like a Matt Gaetz or Jim Jordan, so to speak, that are willing to call out these agencies, it gives people the impression that the right now has the correct message when it comes to weaponization of the federal government, and that the Democratic Party is actually more willing to embrace the establishment.
It does. And that's problematic, because people who come to a critical political consciousness start looking for forces that are critiquing and pushing back, and they see, oh, it's the right wing. It's, you know, these guys, they stand for liberty. You know, and the Republicans do hold the high ground in terms of pushing back against the national security state and around defending free speech. But of course, they've got a terrible record on the environment, terrible record on workers' rights, and they're totally committed to the upward redistribution of wealth. So the great risk is that you have a whole bunch of rebel sentiment emerging and being siphoned off to the right. Yeah, it's a huge problem. And absolutely right. The FBI had infiltrated the Black Panthers. I mean, Fred Hampton, who was in many ways the most Marxist and most explicitly, socialist in his analysis. I mean, it was an FBI infiltrator who drugged him the night of the Chicago police raid, when the Chicago PD opened fire in that apartment and killed him while he lay drugged asleep in his bed, right? So it's like the FBI in that and other cases were instrumental in the murder of political leaders. And Fred Hampton was a kid, right? I forget his age, but it was like he was under 25 or something. It's like, where would American culture be if he had been allowed to mature and continue working and evolving and speaking and educating? You just do the math on the number of people that were lost during COINTELPRO by FBI efforts, and you start thinking that's a really serious and a very detrimental impact on our political culture and our political capacities as a people.
Well said. I want to get into the 2024 presidential election. I'm sure you've heard a lot of rumblings about this. Recently, this journalist from the Washington Post, now Case Study QB clipped this, shout out to Case Study, David Ignatius, actually released an op-ed that says Joe Biden should not run for re-election. I agree with him 100%, but I want people to hear what he said here on Morning Joe. I think this is sending off a lot of alarms, particularly to the Democratic Party, especially since it came from an outlet like the Washington Post, one of the really big mainstream outlets. Everyone, listen to what he said.
I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier. Is Joe Biden the person who can stop Donald Trump or somebody like Trump who gets the Republican nomination? That's what he's got. He's got to look in the mirror, search his soul, and make that decision. And I wanted to raise that question. I'd like him to think that through carefully because I have my concerns.
Well,
okay, I want to stop it there, and I want to get your take on this, Christian, as well. Given Joe Biden's cognitive ability at this point in time, he's having difficulty pulling words together, walking, he's falling down, he doesn't know where he's supposed to be at these press conferences, and it's very apparent to people that there is something going on there. Do you agree with David that he should not run for re-election? I'm sure your opinion may be a little bit different from the opinion that he gave as to why he should not run. Do you agree that Joe Biden should not run up for re-election, and why?
Well, I mean, at this point, I'm so I did vote for Joe Biden last time. I did vote for Biden last time. The time before that, I voted Green. But I honestly, I don't really care. I don't really care which party becomes president. That's how I feel now. I think it's almost a wash. It's like you've got the war that Biden has pursued. This is horrible. The war is an environmental policy. It is a labor policy. It is an education policy. The opportunity costs of sending at least 113, possibly up to 176 billion dollars to Ukraine. The opportunity costs are enormous here, right? The left doesn't seem to care about that. The way the Democrats have clung to their belligerent anti-worker bullying COVID policies. Less than a month ago, a bill came up to reinstate a bunch of airline pilots who had refused to take the jab and lost their jobs, and the Democrats wouldn't let them back, right? Even though there's a pilot shortage. So, there's all sorts of terrible things that Joe Biden has done. He ended the eviction moratorium, which Trump, it was, first of all, it was in the CARES Act. Then it was extended by Trump through executive orders. Biden could have extended that. He didn't. He ended the student debt pause. That was initiated by Trump by an executive order. Biden he's helped rebuild the EPA, which is good. He added $1 billion to it. So it's got a $10 billion budget. But at the same time, in his first 2 years, he has issued more oil and gas leases than Trump did. Almost about the same, 6,900 versus 6,200 for Trump. But, you add it all up. I mean, Trump had horrible labor policies, stacked the NLRB so that its rulings were basically whatever the Chamber of Commerce wanted. His environmental policies were awful. So I'm not saying Trump was better, but it's kind of a wash, really. So I don't really care, to be perfectly honest. I'm feeling very, very cynical and pretty angry towards the Democrats. Now, speaking at, putting on the racehorse, what should they do? I suppose, yes, I suppose they should get rid of Biden because he is quite old, and he does seem to be cognitively impaired. I resisted that for a long time because he seemed to be doing a pretty good job. There would be clips of him bumbling around, and then there'd be clips of him where he had enough Provigil and a good night of sleep or whatever, and he could really articulate his points and bring it. But 80 years old is pretty old. It's a pretty exhausting regimen. So I think they're maybe realizing that they need to have him, replace him. But I don't know. Who knows? Who knows if Biden will go along with that? And then there's also the fact that this is another thing the left has totally denied, totally to the level of hallucinatory nonsense, denied the reality of Hunter Biden's laptop, right? For the longest time, some pretty critically minded left-wing activist type friends of mine were denying that this was real until the Washington Post and the New York Times finally admitted, okay, the laptop is real. Well, the laptop is real, and never mind the sex and cocaine on there. It's about the emails and business dealings. And there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that Hunter Biden was influence peddling and making a lot of money trading on his father's name. And that is not going away. That can't just be swept under the rug. It was for the last election. You know, the story of that laptop is Hunter Biden leaves, Hunter Biden has a horrendous wound and trauma as a kid when his mother dies and his sister dies in a car accident. Later in life, he's sober for like 10 years. Then his brother dies tragically of brain cancer. And at that point, he falls off the wagon and he goes on a bit of a rampage. And amidst that rampage, he leaves his laptop at a repair shop in Wilmington, Delaware, and doesn't come back for it. And he signs a contract that says, if you abandon this laptop, it's ours eventually. The guy who owns a laptop repair shop made numerous documented attempts to get in touch with Hunter Biden to give him this back. And he opens up the laptop, and once it's finally his, the repair shop's possession, and he realizes, whoa, this is Hunter Biden's laptop, and he gets freaked out. So he tries to give the laptop to the FBI. They reject it. His father tries to give it to the FBI. They reject it again. Then finally, they accept the laptop in January. I think it's around January. Maybe it's in the early spring of 2020. So this is in 2019. He's been trying to give them this laptop. When they're rejecting it, he's like really freaked out about what this means. So he gives a copy somewhere along the line to Rudy Giuliani. The FBI come, they take the laptop from this guy, Mac Isaacson. And they tell him, people who keep their mouth shut about this, generally nothing happens to them. Giuliani has a laptop and he thinks, whoa, this is our October surprise. He gives the contents of the laptop to Miranda Devine at the New York Post. Miranda Devine begins writing articles about this. In the meantime, through 2020, the FBI and other agencies of state, through the Aspen Institute, through nonprofits that not have any fingerprints on it, starts convening meetings with social media and the legacy media to say, hey, we have reason to believe that there is going to be a Russian disinformation operation that's about disrupting our elections, and it's going to involve claims that Hunter Biden lost a laptop, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to be aware of this. We're not telling you what to do. You guys are patriots. You figure it out. So when Miranda Devine's stories come out in September of 2020, the New York Post's Twitter handle is shut down for a while. The whole story is killed. So, this is the FBI indirectly intervening in the election. Okay, were the Republicans playing dirty tricks? Yeah, it's an October surprise. Want to play dirty? Great. Okay. But it's like the organs of state power, it would seem, intervened in that election. So they were successful that time around, but this time they realized they can't do it. The other thing that's happened, which is crazy, is that Hunter Biden had this plea deal arranged around a gun charge and tax evasion. And embedded in that plea deal was immunity that extended to all sorts of other potential and known issues arising from the laptop. So freaked out by this that she asked the prosecutor, have you ever seen anything like that? He said, no, I haven't. And she was unwilling to certify to go along with this plea deal. So the plea deal fell apart. The plea deal has fallen apart. Hunter Biden is apparently digging in, and he has now been, just like today or yesterday, indicted on federal gun charges. He's saying, from what I've read, I don't know if this is true, but what I'm reading, is that he's apparently he wants to go to trial, and they might even call Joe Biden as witness. So with that whole story in the background, that plus Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Yeah, I could imagine if I was a Democratic strategist, I'd be concerned that wouldn't go so well for Joe, and maybe we should replace him. Because also the thing with dementia, senility, getting old, whatever it is, you never know what this stuff is. And sometimes people can hold steady, just kind of like not as sharp as they were, and it goes on for years and years. But sometimes people can have rather rapid, precipitous decline. So I think they also are worried that they don't know what will happen necessarily with Joe Biden. Maybe Joe Biden can hold it together. Maybe he'll be exactly the way he is now, which is like, okay, the guy's old, but he can also still make a speech. He can still hold it together. Maybe he'll be like this in a year, but maybe he'll be in much worse shape. And if that's the case, then that could be very serious. So yeah, I think they're kind of they've got a problem. And I mean, they're throwing all these charges at Trump. 91 charges, 4 indictments, and the guy's mugshot looks like a professional photographer took it. This is like, what are we in somebody's novel? This is crazy, isn't it? It's like this is like a movie where it's like the Teflon invincible bad guy, his mugshot, where like, this is it, man. We've got him. This is the scalp we take to humiliate the other side. And then it's like, instead, like the next day, Trump is selling it in swag and using it. So I think that got them spooked. They realized this stuff is not working. And they've almost jumped the shark a little bit, because it's like, what kind of person who's on the fence is going to be able to dig into 91 charges, 4 indictments? It's like, man, that's a huge research project right there. So, I mean, I think the effect is just like, it's just, they oversold this. What? And then like Biden gun charge, and then all this stuff about these deals, and they'll start quoting the emails and to a wider and wider public, 10% for the big guy. And pretty soon there's a lot of swing voters who are just going to be like, once again, it's a wash, whatever. They're all corrupt. I'll vote for one of them, or I won't vote for either of them. And, so the whole campaign of lawfare against Trump by the Democrats threatens to be a wash or worse. It could backfire.
That's a good thing you said. I think that one of the things that has caused a lot of controversy on the left was recently, or actually it was like 2 months ago, I think now, AOC actually came out on Pod Save America and said that she would be endorsing Joe Biden. So for a lot of people that are progressives, they were very upset with AOC, because there are people running against Joe Biden. There's Marianne Williamson, who is running on progressive issues. She is for Medicare for all. Joe Biden is not. There's also RFK Jr., different platform from Marianne Williamson, but then there's also Cornel West, right? So, and in this interview, AOC was vehemently opposed to a third-party challenge, and to Cornel West, said she respects him, but she doesn't think that he should do this. Other progressive have fallen in line and said the same thing. Then there was an article that was released by Freddie DeBauer that said AOC is just an old Democrat now. And that article actually stirred up a lot of buzz or rift, so to speak, within like the left community, so much so that Freddie went on to different podcasts to talk about it and why he wrote the article, gave specific examples. There was a counter to that from Jacobin. They wrote an article saying, here's all the great things that the squad members have actually done, but it was really more so a defense for AOC. And I want to ask you, first and foremost, why do you think some of these squad members who ran on Medicare for all and these progressive policies, why do you think they're supporting Joe Biden instead of those candidates that are running on the progressive issues like Marianne Williamson or Dr. West?
Well, I think it's because of Trump derangement syndrome. I think it's because they have either convinced themselves that Donald Trump threatens fascism, or because they are hostage to an audience and a set of constituencies that believe this. And they worry that if they don't appear to be in lockstep behind Joe Biden, that, their followers will turn on them. So I think it's some combination of that. And it's bad strategy. Why give it all away right up front, right? Why not at least wait and try and get at least some flimsy verbal concessions from Biden that he's going to do something for you? I mean, why? And this was like months ago that AOC, was it in May or April or something like that, she endorsed Biden? I mean, what's the point of that? Bernie did it. I mean, Ilhan Omar was the first to do it. And Katie Porter, I guess Rashid Tlaib has not yet. I don't know, but I mean, it's silly, it's not good strategy, but I think that's what it is. I think it's just this panic. And that's unfortunate because, we saw what Biden did. Actually, Ben Burgess in Jacobin had a good article about this, about critical of AOC's early endorsement of Biden. And he went through, all of the betrayals that Biden gave Bernie nothing. He's given the social democratic left nothing, right? He was talking about a public option. Forget Medicare for all, forget it. He's talked up a public option. As soon as Bernie folded, he was like, public option out the window. The one piece of Bernie's plank he took was $15 an hour minimum wage, and then that went away too. So, he has, he's not in favor of the PRO Act. He's nothing for that. He has made better appointments to the NLRB. And a few little things here and there around labor. And as I said earlier, he has increased the budget of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and rebuilding that agency is important. The EPA does good work. That Nixon era agency and the Nixon era laws that it enforces have done a lot to clean up the environment. But basically, he's done nothing for the social democratic left. So I don't know why they endorsed him early.
There's something that happened recently. Bernie Sanders has gone on a press tour to different shows, basically advocating for why people should come out to support Joe Biden. As we all know, Bernie Sanders is a registered independent, but he usually, caucuses with the Democratic Party and defends the Democratic Party. One of the questions that came up is, how does Bernie Sanders feel about Dr. West running third party, running through the Green Party? And of course, the media knows that they're friends, so they brought that up. How do you feel about your friend, right? Bernie Sanders' response was, yeah, I don't think he should do it. I think this is a mistake. So this really pushes back against this idea of this political revolution that Bernie Sanders was talking about. Like, we saw we could not have a political revolution through the Democratic Party because they will either rig the primaries like they did in 2016, or they'll get outside players like Barack Obama to do what he needs to do, to tell people to drop out of the race, etc. So my thing is, we need to break away from the duopoly. Now, I know third party isn't going to be easy. We pretty much predict like third party candidates are not going to be able to win in 2024 because of the barriers that are in place. But the goal that I see is to get to that 5% so that they can get the federal funding. Then if you get to 15%, then you're on the debate stage. So I think this is a way to start a movement, so to speak, a third party movement to break away from the duopoly. I'm curious to hear from you. Do you believe that Bernie Sanders really feels that there should not be a third party run? Or do you feel he's saying that because Democrat leadership has told him to try to stop this so that there isn't another presidency of Donald Trump? And then also, how do you feel about the possibility of a third party movement in Cornel West's campaign?
I think Bernie is terrified of Donald Trump, and I think this is probably genuine, that he does not want a third party run. When Bernie, in my home state, there is a whole third party, the Progressive Party in Vermont, and Bernie always kept them kind of at arm's length, and did not become a member, and didn't do that much to help build that. But it was his example that really showed the way for the Progressive Party. And the Democratic Party hated Bernie Sanders in Vermont. I mean, the level of hatred for Bernie Sanders in Vermont among Democrats is something you have to see to believe. And so I think all that has just worn him down, and that the main thing is that he's and that spectacle of January 6th, this, you know, the spectacle of Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, these thugs, that really, you know, I mean, that's embryonic fascist militia there, right? So if you overlook the fact that they were all totally penetrated by the police, and that they could have shut down the January 6th riot before it got into the Capitol. If you don't want to get into any of that stuff, then it's like, I can see how you'd become totally terrified and suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. So I think that's what's up with Bernie. And then the other thing is, you know, I mean, Bernie's always had his faults. I mean, he's been bad on foreign policy all along. My father and Bernie Sanders were close friends, and they broke over foreign policy. And I mean, Bernie Sanders remains bad on foreign policy. He has voted for war credits to Ukraine. I mean, I think this is totally outrageous. And I don't approve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I'm not going to pretend that the U.S. did not bait Russia into that, okay? I'm not going to pretend that there aren't actual Nazis in the Ukrainian armed forces, right? And I'm not going to pretend that this isn't a proxy war with an atomic power that feels totally threatened by what we're doing. And we have this cast of Democrat hawks in DC who it seems like have no sense of the danger of the fire they're playing with. And, you know, they're all going to be out in 4 years and on the board of Raytheon or whatever. And it's like they're being incredibly reckless and dangerous with this. You know, there could be atomic war. Short of that, there's the largest nuke plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia, is on the front lines, right? I mean, Chernobyl melted down. Okay, it's a different model. It's not a graphite plant, blah, 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 blah. What, it's got better containment shells and stuff. But like, you know, if Zaporizhzhia melts down, who's going to send 270,000 liquidators, as the Soviet Union did, to cover it in cement and lead, you know? So that war is extremely dangerous, and it needs to stop. I agree with Donald Trump, where he says, like, the killing has to stop. It's got to stop now. And that's not to say Russia's right or any of that. It's just like, this has to stop. And Bernie is doing nothing on that front. And AOC is doing nothing. None of the squad are doing it. And, you know, I really think that negates everything else. As my good friend Jason Moore said, he's like, you know, I'm quoting him without quoting him, but yeah, that war, those war credits, that is your environmental policy. That is your education policy. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I'm for a clean environment and I'm also for the war in Ukraine. It's like the largest single methane emission in history was a direct result of that war. Either the U.S. intelligence agencies or the Ukrainians on their own, but probably some combination of the two, blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. It seems very clear. I mean, why would Russia do that? They own the pipeline. Why would they blow it up, right? They could just turn it off. They had already turned off Nord Stream 2, claiming it was maintenance, right? They don't need to blow it up. You know, that's the single largest methane emission in history. Methane is a CO2, you know, heat trapping gas, 20 to 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So, you know, on and on and on. Yeah, so they're very disappointing, and I no longer put any stock in them. I mean, we're anything positive happening. We've got a lot of rebuilding to do, a lot of education to do.
For those who are not aware, so Christian's father, Michael Parenti, there was a video I saw from, I think this was a couple years ago, where Michael Parenti actually was asked about Bernie Sanders. And Michael said that he would actually characterize Bernie Sanders as more of a centrist. And that was interesting to me. That was the first time I heard someone say that, but he was pointing at, like, specifically, I guess, like his policy decisions, his decisions on foreign policy, like you were just talking about. I think people seem to have this impression that Bernie Sanders is anti-war. He's not anti-war. If you think about some of the way he's voted for legislation as well. But I think that's really good. You guys can look that up on YouTube. If you look up Michael Parenti discussion about Bernie Sanders, you'll see that it's an older video where he talks about his opinion of Bernie Sanders. I think that's important for people to see. It's important for people to see.
I have a dog in here that's freaking out because there's a fox outside. Hey, get out. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. And my, my father, who is 90, he ran for Congress on the Liberty Union Party in Vermont, and Bernie Sanders had started running kind of as like a stunt in the early 70s. And my father ran in 74, I guess it was, or I forget when, 76, maybe it was 76 actually. And basically doubled the vote share that the Liberty Union Party got from, like 2 or 3% to like 7-8%. And he did it in part by cutting his hair and putting on a tie and jacket, and and going around and speaking to working class people like they were going to vote for him, and talking straight class politics to people. And it was the surprise, at least according to my father. Maybe he's sees it through his own rose-colored glasses, but his version of the story, he's Bernie's, that it was like the success he had with this one run, and also his own pressure, suggestions to Bernie. I mean, they were very close friends. They would hang out. That he would say to Bernie, "So you should get serious about this. This is more than just a kind of like yippie style stunt. Like, you could actually become mayor of Burlington." And then, of course, Bernie did, and ran. I think it took him 2 or 3 times to run for mayor of Burlington. Seriously, and then he became mayor of Burlington. He did a fantastic job as mayor of Burlington. He shut down Church Street, which is this like totally gentrified promenade. And I remember telling young radicals in Burlington, I was like, "Yeah, Bernie Sanders did that." They were like, "What? Bernie did that?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah." And all the stores, all the local business people were like, "You can't suppress traffic in downtown Burlington. It'll kill business." Did the exact opposite. He got a minor league baseball team to come in. He was a great executive. Then he finally runs for Congress, becomes congressperson, then a senator, and then he starts voting on foreign policy issues, and reveals his real limits by voting. I forget all of them. I forget how he voted on the Iraq War, but I know he voted for the bombing of Yugoslavia under Clinton. He voted for the '94 crime bill, and hid behind the fact that there was money for midnight basketball programs in it and stuff like that. So yeah, Bernie has his limits, always had, and still does.
Christian, how do you feel about local actions? Because one of the things that I have been telling people is that eventually campaign season is going to end. Everybody's really excited and geared up now because we're in election season heading into 2024. But what I typically tend to see is that after the election is over, people tend to go back to sleep, especially if their candidate did not win. And what I've been trying to get people to do is to focus on some of these local actions. Like, if you live in a ballot initiative state, Massachusetts is a ballot initiative state. So get involved in like ballot measures, like try to put forth ballot measures and get those signatures to put these things on the ballot so that people have more direct democracy. Organize with people within your community, do mutual aid. These are some of the things a lot of us over at Revolutionary Blackout Network, this is what we do. We organize within the community. But oftentimes what I've found is people will get excited about it and they'll want to do it. But the moment election season ramps back up, I feel like people check out of the organizing because they're focused on a candidate. What do you think is the best way for people to either try to do both, or do you feel that one is more important than the other?
Well, that's a tough question. I definitely agree with you. I think people should be involved in local action and organizing for a number of reasons. One, because you can get stuff done that's meaningful at a local level. And also people learn how to do politics by doing it at a scale that's graspable. I don't think that, I think that even though I have expressed deep cynicism about the Democrats in this conversation with you tonight, I do think that the left should keep the door open to elections. It's not that big a deal to vote. And, also running people at a local level is important, though, again, there's, the same kinds of problems emerge. I was involved in the anti-gentrification movement in the late 90s in San Francisco in the Mission District where I lived at that time. And it coincided with the return of district elections. So what had happened in San Francisco was there were these district elections for the Board of Supervisors. San Francisco is the only city that's also a county. and it has this legislative body that's its main, governing body. And back in '78, a member of the Board of Supervisors named Dan White, who was both a former cop and a former firefighter, he quit because he couldn't make a living because they only were paid part-time. He kind of lost his mind, and he went back into City Hall with a pistol. He passed Dianne Feinstein in the hallway, who at that time was a supervisor, and he went to the office of the left-leaning mayor, George Moscone, and shot him dead. And then I think it was Moscone and then Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected politician in America. What's interesting about that is Harvey Milk was also left-wing. Harvey Milk ran against another gay candidate. So the thing about Harvey Milk, who was elected from the Castro, wasn't just that he was gay. The other guy was gay. He was also progressive. So Dan White shot both of them, and then Dan White was acquitted in what was called the Twinkie defense. He said he ate nothing but Twinkies for 2 weeks, and he went totally bonkers, and so he was exonerated or whatever, found not guilty. And there were these massive riots, like 12 police cars were burnt, and there was City Hall was attacked. And then the powers that be in San Francisco said, well, obviously district elections are too divisive. We're going to have citywide elections. So that meant it was harder for progressive neighborhood groups to get a candidate into the city government because you had to run citywide. And so that was the case until the late 90s. And then we finally got district elections back in place. And so the first district elections, a left slate did remarkable, swept. I remember a friend of mine named Chris Daly, who was a 27-year-old housing organizer, ran in the Tenderloin. That's the campaign I worked hardest on. And I remember a buddy of mine told me, oh, Chris Daly's going to run. I literally laughed out loud. I was like, it just struck me as totally ridiculous. Lo and behold, they put up a banker against Chris Daly in the Tenderloin, and Daly beat this guy I think it was 79-21, right? So there was a whole progressive slate got in there. Now, of course, there's limits to what you can do when you've got the power of capital in a place like San Francisco, but there was opportunities there. And I left shortly after that, so I stopped following it. I came back east in 2003, I think 2002, 2003. But yes, I think, local organizing, local elections, that's all good. And also, I don't really know, it's hard to say. I'm not a political scientist. I don't know what is supposed to work. And I don't know what, it's just, I think the one thing that's most important is we need a huge critical mass, and we need, people to be educated and radicalized. And I think that's what's really good about the kind of thing you're doing, this alternative media podcast, this sort of stuff. I mean, more and more people are coming to consciousness. And one of the big problems in our culture is anti-intellectualism. And the kind of work you're doing pushes against that and helps undo that. And that's one of the few really positive things I see is, this one of these pejorative terms that came out of the pandemic that just disgusts me is oh, don't do your own research. It's doing your own research. That's crazy. It's what? I mean, that's appalling. I mean, how arrogant, how elitist, how anti-intellectual can you be to tell regular people not to do their own research? We've got the documents. You don't have to read what the Washington Post says about some government report. You can get the report and read it yourself. People absolutely should do their own research. Now, are there dangers? Are some people who do their own research going to end up with crazy ideas? Yes, but people end up with crazy ideas regardless of doing their own research. So anyway, yeah. In other words, I do not have the answer of what should be done, but I'm all in favor of local organizing, and I'm not, my current total disgust for the Democrats, including the squad, doesn't mean I don't think people should vote. It doesn't mean people should just turn their back on elections. It's not an either or thing, but I mean, definitely putting all your eggs in the basket of electoral politics does strike me as foolish.
Awesome. Well, Christian, thank you so much for coming on. Before you go, where can people find your work?
I've been writing for Compact Magazine most recently. I yesterday did a critical review, I should say, of Naomi Klein's new book, Doppelganger. She traffics in this kind of anti-intellectualism. And so, yeah, Compact, The Gray Zone, I've also been writing for. And, hey, the magic of the internet, you can just Google my name and you'll get all sorts of stuff from places I've written throughout the years and, books that I've written. My most recent book, Radical Hamilton, which is, it's American economic history. And that's also available as an audiobook for people who, have long commutes in automobiles and jog a lot or whatever. So, the internet will tell you.
Awesome. Christian, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Keep up the great work.
All right, guys. I hope you learned a lot there from Christian. I know I saw a couple of people in the chat saying, is he related to Michael? Yes. So Michael Parenti is his father. Yeah, I should have mentioned that in the beginning, actually. I don't realize not everybody knows that. But yeah, like Christian, he's been on here before. Let me pull up my screen here. Really great stuff from him. So yeah, he is also one of the writers for the Gray Zone too. I think he's like a contributing journalist for the Gray Zone. So definitely check out his work. And welcome, guys. Welcome to Thursday night. I also have a guest tomorrow night as well. That'll be a surprise. You will find out tomorrow. But really quick, I want to go ahead and give a shout out to patrons, and we'll go ahead and dive into other news stories tonight. We have some interesting things to talk about. It's really interesting. Like before I went live, I saw that story about Hunter Biden, and I was like, shucks. So I'm going to have to cover that tomorrow. Because I was like, crap. I wanted to talk about that. Just want to make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Woo! All right. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters. There's also Sabbies. They're a healthy bunch. And of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for George Issue, Tim Little, and Charmaine Foltz. Whoop, whoop. Shout out to the newbies in the house. Thank you so much for your support. Really do appreciate you guys. All right, let's go to some of these comments and then we'll go to that beautiful thumbnail and we'll get started. My chair feels a little bit crooked. I don't know. Do I look shiny to you guys? I feel shiny. Like right here. Maybe that's just the light. Oh, well, anywho, let me go ahead and grab this up. Shout out to Ravina Denver for becoming a new Sabby member. Whoop, whoop, Ravina. Thank you, Zach, for the super chat. RFK Jr. provided support and legal counsel for the fired doctors, teachers, and nurses with CHD. He also helped parents fight/beat mass abusive schools. Thank you for that, Zach. And thank you, Willie, the Willie Bragg Show. If you get a chance, watch Free Lunch Express, which is a comedy film about Bernie Sanders. Someone else told me to watch that. I have to check it out. As the first Bernie bro way back to the 90s, I'm moving on. It's a song by, what's that? It's the country group that kind of looks like a boy band. Actually, it looks like an older boy band, like a boy band like in their 50s or something. I'm moving on. Rascal Flatts. That's what it remind me of. All right, guys, let's go ahead and show that beautiful thumbnail and we'll go ahead and dive into more stories that we have tonight. And yes, I do know some country music. All right, guys, tonight we are discussing, of course, Christian Parenti was just here. We're also going to discuss Briahna Joy Gray corrects Ro Khanna. Oh dear, Ro Khanna's doing a press tour, and I got to tell you, it's been kind of revealing. But on this particular discussion on Rising, we got to talk about that where I feel like Khanna was trying his damnedest to not answer the question. We're also going to discuss Elizabeth Warren versus Elon Musk. Not sure if you've heard about this story, but Elizabeth Warren is opening an investigation into SpaceX, which is a company that Elon Musk owns. We'll get into that whole story. And I'm also going to discuss Section 8 removal. This story takes place in Oklahoma, and it should be a warning sign to all of you, because if it's starting to happen in one state, I told you before, this can spread and it can lead to other states as well. So we got to talk about that. And we're actually going to get into that story first. So one of you actually sent me about this story. It kind of flew under the radar. So thank you for emailing this to me. Otherwise, I don't think I would have known about it. But there's a situation that happened in Oklahoma at a particular apartment complex where this is Section 8 housing. And apparently those residents received a 5-day eviction notice, not because they did anything wrong, but because the landlords decided to make a different decision. And we're going to talk about this as a larger issue as well. Residents at Oklahoma apartment complex come home to 5-day eviction notices. Make it a little bit bigger there. Families at Lakeside Village Apartments have less than 5 days to find somewhere else to live after receiving an eviction notice on Thursday. Resident Autumn Kane said, "It seems like I've got nothing but bad luck." That's the sentiment coming from neighbors at Lakeside Village Apartments. The complex handed out eviction notices, giving some less than a week to find somewhere else to live. "We don't know what to do at this point," says Eric Rodriguez, who's another resident. Rodriguez said he and his family are in their third different apartment within the complex, and the conditions have yet to improve. "As y'all can see, the walls are damaged. There's a lot of rodents in here. With things like this, it's stopping me from being a parent and basically giving them what they need." So there's actually a video of this on YouTube. I can't play it because of copyright, because it's local news, but you can also check out that video and you'll see these residents talking about this. After putting in numerous service requests, Rodriguez is now headed to court on Monday to fight the eviction. "We have over 30 work orders, and like all of them were just marked completed. None of the issues were resolved." And I want to pause here for just a second. This is something that it doesn't just happen in Section 8 housing. You do have slumlords where they'll do this. Like you'll put in a work request, a maintenance request, and say, "I need you to fix this." They'll mark it as completed even though they didn't fix anything. I had a slumlord when I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it was one of those things where like you looked at the apartment and the apartment looked fine. Like I didn't see any issues. But as I was living there and time went by, I started to notice that the landlord, and we did have a slumlord, he covered up a lot of the issues either with paint or with patch holes. He would patch up holes so that it didn't seem like there was a hole there. But anyway, that apartment had a lot of issues. And he didn't want to fix the issues so that it would be a permanent fix. He only wanted to cover it up, so to speak, so that it's fine for a short time, because he didn't want to spend the money to actually fix that apartment permanently. And it turns out the whole building had issues. So it wasn't even just the apartment. But I want to point that out. However, now imagine someone living in Section 8. And imagine them dealing with these issues as well. It's not like they can just pick up their items and move to another apartment complex. A lot of times for people that are on Section 8, it can take 5 years to be on a waiting list to even get an apartment. So when they find an apartment for you, that's kind of where you are. It's not like you can't just go somewhere else that quick. But this story gets worse. So listen to this. Rodriguez said management told him the notice was for failing to pay his rent, but said after a new landlord started just months ago, renters can't get into the payment website to pay their bills. He said nothing has been done about it. We reached out to management for comment, but haven't heard back. Kane said the problems don't stop there. Water drainages. My dryer went out within the second day of me living here. We have not gotten that mail key, which keeps me from getting the bank card that I need. Kane stated she pays more than $1,000 in rent and has also voiced her concern. So I want to tell you again, this is Oklahoma, one of the states that has a lower cost of living. This is Section 8 housing, and you just heard a resident is paying over $1,000 a month for rent. So the rent problem is across the board. And I know people living in Section 8 that pay more than that. It goes on to say here, no progress has been made. I don't get any response. Everything here is just so out of order. Now, I want to go back up to this piece here where they said they went to the payment website to pay their bills, but they couldn't get into the payment website. Now, this is a small part of a larger issue in Oklahoma. I want to take you to this particular explanation. It says here, landlord explains why he and others are moving away from housing choice vouchers in Oklahoma. This is why they couldn't get into the payment website. So there are landlords, and I don't know if this is happening in your state too, let me know. But there are landlords in Oklahoma that have pretty much decided that they're not going to take housing vouchers anymore. So listen to this. A landlord explained why he and many others are moving away from accepting housing choice vouchers in Oklahoma. So it goes on to say Brian Mullins with the 1907 Investment Group manages around 100 rental properties. 35 of those are Section 8 eligible. Section 8 is very much in high demand. Mullins said the process of moving someone with a voucher into a home is slow and costly, leading some landlords to abandon the practice completely. Once landlords find a tenant to move into a unit, they must wait for a housing quality standards inspection, which can take weeks, leaving the home vacant until an inspection has passed. A lot of people, I know several property managers that just don't want to do Section 8 anymore because it simply doesn't make financial sense. And they mean financial sense for the landlords. So first and foremost, I want to remind you again that it can take up to 5 years to get into Section 8 housing, to be assigned an apartment or unit. If landlords in Oklahoma are deciding to move away from Section 8 housing, that means there's going to be even more of a shortage in Section 8 housing, which means there's going to be less units available for people who have those housing vouchers. So the question that I ask you, where are those people supposed to go? People who are approved for Section 8, they can't afford to live in the regular apartments that are not Section 8. They can't afford to pay like or at least here in Boston, they can afford to pay like $2,500 a month, $3,000 a month. This is all about profit. So when I tell you that some of the people who are living in these tent communities, number one, not all those people don't have jobs. And not all of those people are on drugs, which is another common thing that's said on mainstream media. Some of those people are people that have been evicted because of issues like this and because that eviction moratorium was overturned. There was a significant increase in the homelessness population during the pandemic. The homelessness population has increased by 25%. Let's go on. Where was I here? Because the amount of time it takes for us to place one Section 8 tenant is probably 2-3 times the amount it would take to move a non-Section 8 tenant to a property. The inspection looks to see if the house and the appliances are operating as designed, making sure the unit is safe to live in. Some landlords said these inspections are too tedious, prolonging the move-in process for tenants and leaving the landlord without income for weeks. The best case scenario is it's going to be 3 weeks after we submit that voucher before they will even do an inspection to even have an opportunity to sign a lease and move in. The home may not pass the first inspection. So then we have to fix it and start the whole 3-week process again to schedule another inspection. Probably 3/4 of the time we're not passing on the first inspection, even if it's super minor. That tells me there's an infrastructure issue. Because the thing is this, you shouldn't fail these inspections. It's pretty standard here. Like in Boston, it's pretty standard for them to have a fire inspection once a year. We used to get the notice that would come and say they're coming to inspect your apartment, the fire inspection. So to me, it's like these buildings, I don't know how old they are in Oklahoma, but they're very old here in New England. These buildings should not be failing these inspections to begin with. And what I've seen happen is some of these landlords, which we call slumlords, the reason why they're failing some of these inspections is because they never fixed these issues permanently to begin with. They basically just put a Band-Aid on it and said, good luck. And you'll see this, like there's other videos that I've done on the ground where I've talked to people about their living conditions where they're doing just that. Instead of fixing the roof or replacing a roof, they just try to patch up holes. And so the ceiling will leak in people's apartments. I've seen this is a common thing here, common thing. So the infrastructure, not just in these buildings, but particularly in this country, it is falling apart. Let's continue. When tenants can move into non-Section 8 housing rentals immediately, Mullen said he waits an average of 6 weeks for a tenant to move into one of his units. While he respects the purpose of inspections, Mullen said many units fail for reasons that are not safety issues. The tenants were not able to move in at one point because one little minor thing failed. And so Section 8 stops them from moving in. What is the minor thing? What's the minor thing that's failing? Leaders of the Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency, which operates in all 77 counties across the state, said they are confident they are doing a fair job of putting people in safe, affordable housing. They also said they value their partnership with landlords in Oklahoma. We value our landlords 100%. Without our landlords, we would not have a Section 8 housing choice voucher program. For the agency, it isn't the process that is pushing landlords away. Jenkins said property owners could simply get more money by not renting to Section 8 tenants. At the end of the day, this is what it comes down to: more money. And what people have to understand, having known people who have been on those wait lists for Section 8 housing, it's not easy to just get into Section 8 housing. And then you have this issue here in Oklahoma. Crazy times, man. And I just want to cover this piece here as well. In December, the Oklahoma City Housing Authority said they have seen an increase in the number of landlords stepping away from Section 8, but it isn't just happening in the metro. The Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency said this is a trend all across Oklahoma. I'm afraid that me and my sisters are just going to be homeless, trying to wait for these approvals, trying to wait for these Section 8s, these landlords, just whatever. That's coming from Rebecca Nunez. These are the kind of things that are happening on the local level that a lot of people don't know about. If it's not happening in their state or their city, if it's not national news, this was not national news. That's why I can't play the video, because it's on local news. People don't know these things are happening. And so for the people with the pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, the question that I have for you is this: what are those people supposed to do? So we have become a profit-driven society, even if that means that people will be pushed out onto the street. Pay attention, guys. It's happening all over. I'm going to go to some of the comments here. What's up? Shout out to Roger Meadows for becoming a member or being a member for 5 months. Sabrina, I just realized that the people having the right to pass and repeal laws and ratify amendments makes them the fourth branch of government. Thank you so much for that, Roger. Oh, where is this? Oh, I did hit that right. Sorry. Thank you, Zach. RFK has planned to limit corporate-owned homes, citing a need to both fight BlackRock buying up housing and countering the WEF's "you will own nothing" strategy. That's interesting. We'll talk about BlackRock tomorrow because there's a climate story about that I'm going to get into. But thank you for that. And thank you for the super sticker, Donald King. Babel says it's illegal, I thought, local and national, to discriminate against Section 8 vouchers except on owner-occupied housing. I can tell you one thing from experience. Landlords seem to know the law really well, and they seem to find loopholes, right? Especially in states where the landlords are more likely to be protected than the tenants. Tenants have a lot of protection here in Massachusetts. Like, we have a lot more leeway. But I've lived in states, like when I lived in North Carolina, it was not that way. Jessica says, my friend's Section 8 landlord lives in New York. She mails the check there. He never comes, and no inspections. I guess no regulations here. Yeah, and it's different state by state. Thank you, Desert Mantis. In the early 90s, I rented a 2-bedroom house for $300 a month. Jesus, I don't know where you live or where you lived at that time, but I've never had rent that cheap. Wow. And Teresa says, why don't the squad push for more affordable housing? Ayanna Presley has pushed for more affordable housing, but the problem is, what I've noticed here is a lot of times it's privatized, and the affordable housing it's a tricky term, because affordable to who? If you look at the Boston City website, some of these units that are listed under affordable housing are like $4,000 a month. And so it's affordable for who? Because I can't pay $4,000 a month, So it's something to think about, really something to think about. How are we on Rockfin, Eric? We good? I think we're good. Okay, cool. All right, guys, if you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me with the algorithm. Thank you very much. Smash the thumbs, smash the thumbs. This next story that we're going to get into, Elizabeth Warren. She's back up to her usual tricks. This story is interesting because this is the first time I think I've covered a story in a long time where I actually see both sides of the story. I don't really know what the answer is, but I do want to talk about this. Elon Musk company SpaceX, they have a contract, or part of their company, they have a military contract. Elizabeth Warren has decided to open an investigation into Elon Musk's SpaceX company and its involvement with the Ukraine war. I kid you not. I'm going to talk about both sides of this because I can tell you where I feel Elizabeth Warren is wrong, and I can tell you where I feel Elon Musk may be wrong as well. But what is killing me are the people who are out there praising, yay, Elon Musk. I still don't know why people praise Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a billionaire. He does not care about you. He does not care about me. This guy is loaded. He's going to be fine. People don't need to come to his defense. But I think this right here is very telling when it comes to the federal government, private companies, billionaires, and foreign policy. Let's get into this clip here.
I want to turn to another topic that's coming up for Washington this week, and that's artificial intelligence. Just in a couple of days, Senator Chuck Schumer has invited Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, other tech CEOs over to Washington to meet about the future of this technology. It seems like this is a really pivotal moment for the future, but you've voiced some criticism with that strategy of bringing the tech leaders into Washington. But I wonder, I mean, is it really the wrong strategy to bring them to the table and figure out a way forward before this technology goes too far?
Look, if we're going to bring tech billionaires in to tell Congress how to write laws, we know what they're going to say. This is an opportunity to lobby. They're going to say, write the laws in ways that protect their billion-dollar fortunes and the head start that they have in the AI industry. But I'm glad to hear from these folks. I just don't want to hear from them behind closed doors. I want to hear from, we have a way to hear from them, and that is in hearings. I want to hear from them when they come in to a hearing that is open to the public, anybody can see it, and where senators or representatives get to ask some tough questions. I don't think we should be going behind closed doors to let these guys have nonstop lobbying for hours and hours and hours without any public scrutiny of what they have to say and the claims they're making.
So I just mentioned Elon Musk, one of the tech executives in this space. He's also involved in quite a lot of other things. And there have been some reports recently about his involvement in the war in Ukraine and the way that his control of this Starlink, basically internet technology there, plays a huge role in that war. Does Elon Musk have veto power, basically, in the Ukraine conflict right now?
Let's pause right here and let me chime in for a second. So the first part was about the tech bros coming to DC and talking about AI. Again, it was interesting for Elizabeth Warren to say that they should not have that authority to make decisions in reference to Congress where they're concerned. But the reality is these billionaires and corporations have been controlling both political parties for as long as I've been alive. So it's interesting that she phrases it that way, as if they don't already have control. But this piece here in reference to Starlink, did I say SpaceX earlier? SpaceX, Starlink, same thing. Anyway, Starlink, Elon Musk has different, companies, but with this particular company, remember that Elon Musk chose to set up Starlink, and that was supposed to, I guess, aid within this war with Russia and Ukraine. One thing that we have to keep in mind before she responds is that this is his company and he is a private citizen. Now, that goes into this question. The military contract that Elon Musk has, what does the contract say? Because what Elizabeth Warren is upset about is the fact that Elon Musk is not willing to, I guess, aid Ukraine in reference to weapons to push back against Russian aggression. She's upset about that. But does she really have a say-so in what his private company can do in reference to war and foreign policy? So this is very, very interesting story here in the sense that what is the boundary in reference to what a private citizen who has their own company can do if they have a military contract? Let's continue.
Well, look, no one is supposed to make foreign policy for the United States other than the United States government. It is not up to one billionaire to go off in secret and change our foreign policy. I think we need an investigation, both from the Department of Defense and from Congress, to look into the arrangement with Elon Musk and his company that would give him the ability to, in effect, turn off or restrict in any way access for Ukraine or anyone else in contravention of specific policies of the United States of America.
Okay, we're going to go back because this is the piece here where I think I'm really, again, I am not trying to defend Elon Musk at all. Not trying to defend him at all. But if we want to look at both sides of this, I get that Elizabeth Warren is saying that one billionaire should not be able to make foreign policy decisions. Although I would argue that already happens. I would argue that already happens, but I understand what she's saying. I also understand Elon Musk's side of it, which this is my company and I can choose whether or not I want to send some type of aid towards Ukraine or not. It's my company. But what is the fine line in reference to foreign policy and these private companies in the US government. Let her say this again, because there's another part I want to discuss.
Congress to look into the arrangement with Elon Musk and his company that would give him the ability to, in effect, turn off or restrict in any way.
So it sounds like to me that they're not aware of the arrangement. Who approves these contracts? I'm sincerely asking. I don't know. But the military contracts, who approves it? Wouldn't the military be the ones that would approve the contract? So again, that's why I said we would have to ask what's in the contract. Let's continue.
Access for Ukraine or anyone else in contravention of specific policies of the United States of America. Those foreign policy decisions are not subcontracted off to one billionaire. They belong to the federal government, and the federal government that represents all of the American people.
So in some other news today, in the House of Representatives, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is calling for the opening of a formal impeachment inquiry.
Sorry, we're not going to get to that part yet. Isaac said the Pentagon, and Simone said the DOD probably. Yes, someone is approving. So my thing is this the question that I think we need to ask ourselves? First and foremost, why is the US government depending on a private company in reference to foreign policy? Why are they depending on Elon Musk's company to help aid Ukraine? Isn't that what isn't that what the military is for? Isn't that what the federal government's for? And two, what are the restrictions of a private company choosing to stay out of foreign affairs? So we would have to see what is in that contract and what it says. But the fact is this: the US government should not be depending on a private company in reference to foreign policy. What happened if Elon Musk just decided to shut down his whole company or sold it to someone else? What would they do? Why are they part of the problem? I know she's saying a billionaire cannot make these decisions. I get that. I totally get it. But part of the problem is that the US government was willing, or at least the Pentagon, the DOD, whichever, were willing to have this military contract with the company in the first place. And that goes for all of them. Any of these Raytheon can change their contracts. Lockheed Martin can change their contracts. SpaceX can change their contracts. Then what do? Now, Nico, I want to bring this up because I thought he did a really good job here. Nico has these little short clips that he does for Hotspot. And I think that Nico was really on point here because he said this is probably the first time he ever thought that he would give a shout out to Elon Musk because of this. Because the reality is he's basically taken a step back from escalating this conflict, preventing us from getting closer to World War III, basically, is what the decision I'm thinking that Elon Musk is making. And we also have to ask this question too. If it were the other way around, if the government were not depending on him to help Ukraine, again, this is to help Ukraine attack Russian Navy, if I remember correctly. If it were the other way around and Elon Musk chose not to help Russia attack Ukraine, I think Elizabeth Warren would be totally fine with that. So when can the government tell a private company what to do? Let's get into this clip here from Nico. I thought this was pretty interesting.
So liberals are super upset because Elon Musk wouldn't allow his Starlink system to be used by Ukraine to potentially start World War III. In what could very well be the best marketing ploy of the decade, a leaked excerpt from Elon Musk's biography showed that Elon Musk blocked Starlink from allowing Ukraine to attack Russian assets in Crimea. Now, the reason that he did that was pretty justified. He got on the phone with some Russian military officers and they said there will be consequences and repercussions of a nuclear nature if you allow this attack to go down.
So there's also that. What's that? Sebastian says a government could tell a private company not to not violate workers' rights. This is all interesting. And, maybe this will be a wake-up call for the U.S. government. Here we go.
If you allow this attack to go down. So I can't believe I'm actually praising Elon Musk here, but thank you for not allowing World War III to go down, I guess. Now, even though you and I might be appreciative of Elon making an executive decision, given all the information, and not allowing World War III to happen, Democrats don't seem to be all that happy about it. Both liberal media and liberal politicians have been like, God damn you, Elon. Why wouldn't you allow World War III to happen? This calls for an investigation. Now, as CNN's defense, I kind of get it. Ratings have been pretty low for them. So if I was a major media conglomerate, I would probably want World War III too if my numbers were in the tank. But more importantly, I've heard Elon say that he wants a peaceful resolution in Ukraine, but what I just learned, basically, is that Ukraine literally could not fight a war on behalf of NATO if it wasn't for your Starlink services. So Elon, if you really want to stop World War III and you really want peace in that region, how about you stop letting the Pentagon use your services and sell them to neo-Nazis? Just a suggestion. I don't know.
And he can do that. He can do that at any time, which is why, again, the U.S. government should not depend on a private company to do their bidding. Now, there's another clip here. I just got to pull up. I forgot to add this one. There's another clip here from MSNBC that I want to share as well in reference to this particular story. Representative Crow reacts to Musk refusing Ukraine requests for Starlink use in the Russia attack. So let me go ahead and pull this up because I think this is all just very telling. And also, too, when we think about like Elon Musk, another thing that I do want to say, you have to remember, guys, like he changes his mind at the drop of a hat, right? Like he bought Twitter and then not too long after he was like, should I sell it to someone else? Should someone else be in charge? Like he can change his mind at any time. So they shouldn't depend on him in the first place. Let's bring up this video here from MSNBC. I want you to hear what Representative Crow had to say about this particular situation with Elon and Ukraine.
Now to the topic of the war in Ukraine. Today, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, he was pressed about these reports. Elon Musk refused to provide Starlink access to the Ukrainian military for their operations against Russia. Let's take a listen to the exchange.
Musk says he was reportedly afraid that Russia would retaliate with nuclear weapons. Musk says that's based on his private discussions he had with senior Russian officials. Are you concerned that Musk is apparently conducting his own diplomatic outreach to the Russian government? Really?
So let me rewind back just a bit. This is Anthony Blinken, and this is also Jake Tapper. And see, watch the look on Blinken's face because it's very telling.
Private discussions he had with senior Russian officials. Are you concerned that Musk is apparently conducting his own diplomatic outreach to the Russian government? Really, none of this concerns you?
Jake, I can't speak to conversations that may or may not have happened. I don't know. I'm focused on the fact that the technology itself, Starlink, has been really important to the Ukrainians.
Well, to Blinken's point, it certainly has. It has been really the crux of a lot of the Ukrainian military operations. And then Musk gets involved, allegedly, by this one particular approach, one operation. What do you make of that? And should Elon Musk face some sort of repercussions?
Repercussions for what, though? Guys, we got to talk about this. I should have made a poll. I should have made a poll about this. Repercussions for what? It's his company. Is there some law or rule that says that if your company has military contracts, that you have to aid the countries that the government is also aiding, that you have to participate, you have to pick a side, or that you have to intervene at all? Like, hold him accountable for what? Let's continue.
Well, Alex, here's what's happening. This is a broader challenge that we're facing as a country right now. Space is becoming heavily commercialized, right? It used to be the domain of governments, but clearly private companies are bigger and bigger players launching these satellite constellations that are critical for our communications, and that trend continues. And other aspects of our national security continue to move more towards the private sector. And there are some benefits there, and that a lot of innovation, a lot of incredible technology is certainly coming out of that. But we cannot, and I just want to be very adamant about this, we cannot be in a situation where you have a billionaire, one person or a private company that's making veto decisions over the matters of our national security or the national security of our partners and allies.
Why was there a military? So Isaac says they contracted services from him and he's not holding up his side of the contract. Oh, but I guess what I'm saying is I would really like to, and I don't think I can find this, but I would really like to see what it says in the contract, because does it say in the contract that he has to basically aid Ukraine regardless, even if there is a threat? They're saying that he had a conversation with Vladimir Putin, that there would be some type of retaliation if that did happen. What does the contract say in reference to retaliation? This is very interesting. Very interesting. I hope they learn their lesson.
That is unacceptable. I'm going to be digging into this as a member of the Intelligence Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee to see what checks we need to put in place to make sure that these unelected, unaccountable executives or billionaires cannot make decisions like that.
But they do this all the time. But the billionaires, it's interesting. Billionaires cannot make decisions like that. Billionaires make decisions. They control both political parties. They control politicians. Now all of a sudden they want to say, oh no, they can't do these. They can't do these things. So maybe this will be a lesson learned for the government, because you guys know how Elon Musk is. I mean, I know you don't know him personally, but you see how he's been since he bought Twitter. He changes his mind whenever he feels like it, at the drop of a hat. Interesting. Oh man. Multimind says SpaceX and Starlink are related. It's a rocket launched internet tech, Starlink. Thank you, Multimind. Thank you, Todd. Also, Putin made it clear attacks using our weapons on Russia or any attacks on Crimea would put the US and NATO in direct conflict with Russia. It's wild, man. Thank you, Helpful Harm. And the military has never worked for the American people. They have always worked for the billionaires. Most Americans are against most wars. Bingo. Bingo, bingo. JB says, Sabs, this is why all military corporations should be nationalized, and all of our weapon systems and ammunitions should be produced in-house. War should not be for profit. It would save us money as well. There you go. Robert says oil companies do the same thing. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Elon Musk has been in a lot of hot water lately. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Citizens of Oklahoma may initiate statewide legislation via ballot measures in the form of either initiated state statutes or initiated constitutional amendments. In Oklahoma, citizens have the power to repeal legislation via veto referendum, outlaw private equity from owning housing by running a CBI amendment. Thank you so much for that, Roger. He's talking about the housing situation in Oklahoma. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe this will be a big wake-up call, you guys, because it's a sticky situation. Because on one hand, like I said, I understand both sides, but it's just, I don't know, man. I don't know. Woohoo! What is that, Richie? Musk is a fictional character. Okay. Oh, man. Oh, man. Okay. This next story here Ro Khanna versus Briahna Joy Gray. So Ro Khanna is also on his media tour. So he was on Breaking Points, and he was also recently on The Hills Rising. And the discussion a little bit, I think it got a little bit heated, but I think what was interesting about this discussion in reference to how Joe Biden has done as president of the United States, his job performance, I think it was interesting to me the way that Ro Khanna kind of dodged some of these questions, or like the way he tried to avoid answering the questions. And Bree really pushed back on him and continued to ask him, like, no, but I'm seriously, can you answer the question? Because he's trying to protect Joe Biden. Look, Ro Khanna know Joe got to go. Ro Khanna know Joe got to go. He knows it. But at the same time, you know, he knows he's gotten the word from DNC leadership that he has to go out there and protect Joe Biden at all costs. I think this conversation is very revealing. And I also have some data receipts that I want to show you that debunks what Ro Khanna is saying. And these receipts are recent in reference to the economy. So let's go ahead and get into this particular discussion here with Briahna Joy Gray and Ro Khanna man.
The issue as well, I think people have been pointing to the consequences of the pandemic era programs ending. The administration once bragged about having child poverty. Now we're seeing kind of record levels of the same. There has been a lot of disappointment around the student debt issue, as I'm sure you know. Many of us got emails in our inbox over the last week or so announcing that we were going to have to start repayments as of next month in the middle of an election year after 3 years of having the loans on a moratorium that was put there by Donald Trump while Donald Trump was in office. Do you think that Democrats can make a good case that the economy is doing well and that they should feel better about their economic status today than they did 3 or 4 years ago?
The question, because he's going to go all around corners with this. Do you think the Democrats can make a good case that the economy is doing well today? Let's just all hold on to that, because Ro likes to talk a lot. So here we go.
But Briahna, I do. I mean, we got the infrastructure bill passed. If you go around the country, there are a lot of good paying jobs. We're bringing manufacturing back, semiconductor manufacturing,
Let's go back to this part. Watch this. They kill me with this.
Better about their economic status today than they did 3 or 4 years ago.
But Briahna, I do. I mean, we got the infrastructure bill passed. If you go around the country, there are a lot of good paying jobs.
That part right there. Good paying jobs. Define good paying. Because they all say this. We have good paying jobs. What's good? Depending on where you live, $15 an hour might be good. Depending on where you live, $15 an hour, maybe nothing for you. So what do they mean when they say good paying? I would ask for a definition of that. What is the hourly wage that Ro Khanna considers to be a good paying job? And I think we need to start asking this question, guys. It's just like, well, what does that mean? Let's continue.
Bringing manufacturing back, semiconductor manufacturing, new electric vehicle battery manufacturing. We're creating a lot of union jobs. Unions have never been stronger. The president's NLRB has said that if you have unfair labor practices, this is Jennifer Abruzzo in the CMEX decision, then
you guys see these same talking points? Watch this. I told you.
But Briahna, I do. I mean, we got the infrastructure bill passed. If you go around the country, there are a lot of good paying jobs. We're bringing manufacturing back, semiconductor manufacturing, new electric vehicle battery manufacturing. We're creating a lot of union jobs. Unions have never been stronger. The president's NLRB has said that if you have unfair labor practices, this is Jennifer Abruzzo in the CMEX decision, then unions will automatically be recognized. So a lot of
the NLRB, you know, that's been getting a lot of attention lately. You guys notice that some of the people in independent media have the same talking point as the politicians and the Democratic Party? Anybody notice this? Some of the people who said that they're progressives and they believe in these progressive issues, they're all saying this is the same thing. Crystal and Kyle said the same thing. The NLRB. Sam Cedar, we got the NLRB, Cenk Uygur, the NLRB. They're using the same talking points the Democratic Party is using. And I'm going to tell you guys this going into 2024. I believe the reason that a lot of these people have gotten on board with this NLRB talk and the union talk, and I'm for unions. But the reason why they're on board with it is because that is what they are going to use to convince you to vote for the Democratic Party in 2024. Because they know Joe Biden hasn't really done anything. That's why they're using this. And Ro Khanna is doing the same thing. They're following the verbiage of the politicians, you guys. When you are actually supposed to be above the politicians when it comes to the narrative and the message, you're not supposed to follow their narrative. You're supposed to have your own narrative. So here we go. Now you know why they all keep saying the same thing. The NLRB, and I told you, the NLRB does not help people who are disabled and cannot work. It does not help people who are homeless. It doesn't help those people in Oklahoma that just got evicted because the landlords had decided to get rid of Section 8. It doesn't help those things. But that is the Democratic Party talking point going into 2024. And for those that are part of progressive media that are telling you this right now, they're going to be leading with that going into 2024. This praise of the unions is not because they really, really believe, yes, we need strong unions. We weren't hearing about all this before. They just keep talking about it over and over and over, back to back, because that is what they are going to use as the excuse for you to vote for the Democratic Party. Watch.
What has happened? But look, I disagree on the student loans. I mean, it was the Supreme Court that struck that down. And I believe I've pushed the president to say, at least let's stop the interest accrual. As someone who took out $100,000 of loans, I was fortunate. I paid them back. But there were years in my 20s when I was making payments and the number kept piling up because of interest. And so we have to at least stop that interest accrual. And I do hear people struggling because of the student loan issue.
Well, Representative Khanna, I do have to push back on two things. One, the loans have started again because Joe Biden chose to negotiate the end of the moratorium as part of the last debt ceiling negotiations. That was a choice by Joe Biden that cannot be attributed to the Supreme Court. If he plans to challenge the Supreme Court decision, as he is doing, he could say, let's continue the moratorium so that people don't have to pay sums that ultimately are going to be canceled when I am successful. And two, many student loan experts, all of the student loan experts that I've spoken to, and I think I've talked to you about this on my own podcast as well, so that Joe Biden could have made the choice to cancel all student debt via executive order using the same authority that Trump used to start the moratorium in the first place. But because he chose to means test it, he gave people this hook to go ahead and challenge it in court. So for many voters, they understand that this was a choice, a series of choices that the Biden administration made that have put them in the situation of starting repayment next month. So what do you say to those 44 million voters who might be feeling betrayed by Joe Biden in this instance?
So what Bree is pointing out is the fact that obviously Joe Biden did not follow instructions when it came to canceling student loan debt. He could have done it by executive order. He could have canceled all of it, right? Then there was this issue where Ayanna Pressley, Elizabeth Warren, and Chuck Schumer actually gave instructions to Joe Biden to cancel student loan debt via the Higher Education Act of 1965. And Joe Biden chose to do this through the HEROES Act, which was beyond cray, considering that the pandemic emergency, he had already ended that. So obviously that was going to get struck down. It did get struck down by a federal judge and it ended up in the Supreme Court. And we ended up in this hellish of a situation. Whether or not you believe that student loan debt should be canceled or not, the way that Joe Biden went about doing this was just ridiculous. He could have just easily done this a lot better. But again, I don't think the real intention was for him to cancel all of it in the first place. I think that Joe Biden did just enough to try to convince people, hey, I'm trying to do something here, and not realizing that more people were paying attention to some of those organizations that were pressuring Joe Biden to cancel student loan debt more so than they were electoral politics. So I think this is something that we have to hold on to, because I want you to hear Ro Khanna's response, because he's trying to blame it on the Supreme Court. But the point that Bree is making, if he would have done it the correct way in the first place, it would have never made it to the Supreme Court and we would have been in a different situation.
Well, look, the president used the HEROES Act, and he can still use the Higher Education Act. So even though he made that deal with McCarthy, which I disagreed with, I voted against it, as you remember, he still now is pursuing the Higher Education Act to trying to suspend the repayments on the loans. And I believe under the Higher Education Act, he will have the authority. And I do think the administration should, when they have the authority, zero out the loans that up to the 20,000 that they've said, so that people, if they're going to court, are going into court to sue students as opposed to having no relief. Would I have been more aggressive than the president? I would have. But the reality is that the president has done a lot. I mean, he has.
Pause here for a second. So the repayments start in October. So we don't have that much longer, 2 weeks and like maybe 2 days or something, 2 weeks and a day. In October, they go back into repayment. So Khanna is saying that he can actually do this through he can do the fix in reference to the repayments with the Higher Education Act. He can still do that. The question is, why hasn't it been done? Why are we always racing up against like this clock every time? And then two, it causes a lot of stress for the people. And two, the other problem that I have in reference to this whole deal with the student loan debt, student loan repayments was paused under the Trump administration. Some people may not remember this. I do, though. Those of us that have student loans, I remember when they were paused, okay? They were paused under the Trump administration. The student loan repayments are going to be starting again under the Biden administration. When we look at the stimulus checks, we received more money under the Trump administration than we did under the Biden administration, and Biden shortchanged us on a check. These are things that people are going to remember. Let's continue.
Invoke the authority. He's fought this in court. He's now invoking another authority. And the real blame of this is on the Supreme Court and on the Republican side, where they made zero effort. So I and some progressives want to make an effort of a 10. President Biden probably was at a 7. And then you've got a Supreme Court and Republicans at a 0. The blame doesn't go from someone who's at a 7. The blame goes to people who are at a 0.
The blame goes to people on all sides, Ro. The blame goes to people at all sides because he didn't do this correctly in the first place to begin with. So yes, you can still blame Joe Biden. You can blame the Supreme Court. But if Joe Biden would have done this the correct way in the first place, we wouldn't have had to deal with the Supreme Court ruling. And Khanna knows that, but he's trying to avoid dealing with that part of the discussion.
Khanna, isn't it the case that but for him choosing to negotiate of all things the end of the moratorium, people would not have to start paying in the middle of an election year their student loan payments back on October 1st? That was a choice that was purely within Joe Biden's purview, no?
No, because he negotiated saying that he wouldn't invoke the HEROES Act. He's now invoking a different authority. He's invoking the Higher Education Act. And if the Supreme Court was going to strike down
that's a different
the use
question,
of the HEROES Act, then
oh, man, he's talking about something completely different. She's talking about the repayment. And when it comes to the repayment, yes, that's happening under Joe Biden. That's the point that she's trying to make. Hold on.
For him choosing to negotiate of all things the end of the moratorium, people would not have to start paying in the middle of an election year their student loan payments back on October 1st. That was a choice that was purely within Joe Biden's purview, no?
No, because he negotiated saying that he wouldn't invoke the HEROES Act. He's now invoking a different authority. He's invoking the Higher Education Act. And if the Supreme Court was going to strike down
that's a different
the use
question,
of the HEROES Act, then the negotiation wouldn't have mattered. It was moot after the Supreme Court. He would have had to have a different negotiation. The negotiation only covers the HEROES Act. It doesn't cover.
I'm specifically talking about the end of the moratorium, not this. The question about whether or not the cancellation itself will ultimately be held up by the courts is a separate issue. But we can move on. But I want to be really clear: the moratorium is what people are concerned with. That Joe Biden made the choice to make them start repaying in the middle of an election year.
And people will remember that. People will remember that. And let me tell you something, you guys. You know how we know that our government is full of it in reference to repayments? They have had a pause on student loan repayments. Again, this goes back to the Trump administration. It started under Trump. So it's been what? A couple years, right? So if those student loan companies can go this long without payments, that go to show you he could have just canceled it. Because let me tell you what's going to happen when these loans go into repayment in October, particularly since I'm going to show you the inflation rate in a second, because I'm going to tell you he's not honest about the economy. Some of these people are not going to be able to pay these loans. And if that happens, we could see ourselves dealing with another similar housing crisis, but this time a housing crisis that is escalated by student loan debt. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but let him continue. This is something to think about.
But the moratorium is also under the HEROES Act. You could have the moratorium under the Higher Education Act. And
but the moratorium wasn't. But the moratorium wasn't what was challenged. That's a Trump era policy that has been persisted for 3 years.
True, but the moratorium, the deal with McCarthy only applies to the HEROES Act. You can still have a moratorium under the Higher Education Act or other authorities, and we should be pushing for a moratorium on interest accrual and student repayment. And I believe we can do that even under the terms of the deal, because that only restricts the HEROES Act.
Right.
It's always funny when he says we should be pushing. He's the one that's in Congress, so he should be pushing for these things. But the point is we're coming up against the clock, and it's 2 weeks away from October, and that's when the repayments do start. And when I show you what's true about the economy, what they're not telling, what Ro Khanna is not being honest about, you'll understand why I feel the way that I do when it comes to the repayment. Let's continue.
Obviously, there are many of us who think that people should repay exactly what they borrowed, and that it would be a blunder to forgive people's debt obligations. Actually, but that's my perspective, obviously not the progressive perspective.
Robbie, that ain't got nothing to do. That has nothing to do with it, because the thing is, I knew he would slide that in there, because the thing is this, whether you agree with canceling student loan debt or not, that's not the issue. The issue is the fact that Joe Biden made promises. He ran on promises to the people, and he hasn't fulfilled his promises. That's the problem. I knew he was going to slide that in there.
We wanted to ask you about a couple other things. You put forth a new 5-point political reform platform, which includes things like banning candidates for federal office from receiving donations from lobbyists or political action committees of any kind, 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices. If Democrats win the House, will this legislation be a priority? Can you talk about it a little bit more?
Pause here so you guys can see it for a second. 5-point comprehensive political reform, banning candidates for federal office from receiving donations from lobbyists or political action committees of any kind. Let me ask y'all a question. Why didn't Ro Khanna just say ban corporate money from electoral politics? Not willing to go that far. You see, like if you're going to go there, go all the way there. Ban corporate money from electoral politics. The other thing, banning members of Congress from trading stocks and becoming lobbyists after they serve. Says one of the biggest stock trading mofos in Congress. I've shown you guys before on this show about Ro Khanna's stocks, spending and trading and closing deals and all different types of stocks. Ro Khanna's response on Twitter is, those are not my stocks. Those are my wife's stocks. They're all in your name, all in his name. Let's go on to the other ones here. 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices, 12-year term limits for members of Congress. Ooh, that one would be, ooh, man, Nancy would not be there. Sorry. A judicial code of ethics for all federal judges and Supreme Court justices. Let's go on.
Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, how do they feel about your legislation? Fill us in.
Well, I'll be putting it up hopefully for a vote, and I want the Democrats to run on this. The president and members of Congress, we should have zero PAC money. We should not have leadership PACs. I don't take PAC money, never have, don't have a leadership PAC. We shouldn't have money from corporations or lobbyists. Members of Congress shouldn't be allowed to go become lobbyists ever. Members of Congress shouldn't benefit personally through stock trading. Members of Congress should be term limited, as should Supreme Court justices, and we need an ethics code for Supreme Court justices. The amazing thing is this common sense proposal has had so much support from across the aisle, and I think it is a opportunity for us to run on reform, to make reform. No one in the current political system is perfect. What voters are looking for is a bold agenda to fix the system.
Voters aren't looking for an agenda. Voters are looking for actual solutions. I can have an agenda. How many times have you gone to a meeting? You guys ever gone to meetings and like you get the agenda like first and you sit down, here's the agenda. And you may not make it through all the items on the agenda, or you do make it through all the items on the agenda during the meeting, but then there are follow-ups that need to happen with those agenda items and people don't follow up. My life story in higher ed, okay? My life story in higher ed. And so is going to do this item, and so is going to do that action item. And we all leave the meeting like, yeah, great, sure. Next meeting, never followed up. Anyway, you can't just have an agenda. You have to actually fix the problems. You can write anything down. You can have a 5-point plan, a 10-point plan. You can have as many plans as you want. Joe Biden also had plans written down. But if you're not actually going to implement those things, then what's the point? That's how I see it.
Do you think Biden should embrace this agenda?
I do. You know, I don't understand how a twice impeached, 4 times indicted former president is trying to run as the outsider. And I believe that the Democratic Party needs to run as the outsider that are going to clean up a system that obviously isn't working for the ordinary Americans. Do I think most people who come to Congress have good intentions? I do. I actually do. But the point is that the system itself is totally influenced by lobbyists, by special interest money, by members then ending up and going and becoming lobbyists. And the American people have no faith in that the system is actually looking out for them.
If Ro Khanna is sitting here and he's willing to admit that the system is a problem, which I agree, the system is a problem, the corporate money, the lobbyists, why is Ro Khanna still willing to support that system? When you endorse Joe Biden, when you endorse corporate candidates, you are still supporting that system. If Ro Khanna was serious about what he was saying, he would be supporting someone who is running against the system. He would be supporting someone like a Dr. West who's not taking this corporate money, but he's not going to do that. You know why? Because Ro Khanna is full of shit. Ro Khanna is just saying enough so that he can still have some type of progressive street cred without actually really doing these things. That's typically how it works. AOC has championed this. Ilhan Omar is actually, she a little bit more tougher than the other ones. Rashida Tlaib is championed this, except for Israel Palestine. She's right on that issue. But you guys, you see where I'm coming from. That's what he's doing. So I'd call him out on that.
These are the types of reforms that will say we're trying to prioritize people over special interests.
You know, there are challengers to Joe Biden, Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., who are running on, I think, objectively more progressive platforms, or probably even are more on board with some of the policies you yourself have put forward, including what you've just outlined. And obviously, there are so many in the Democratic Party that have said they would like a different nominee, which I know I've already asked you about. But is it simply because, you know, Biden is the incumbent, so, you know, it would be very odd to not support the incumbent, even though there are more progressives in the race? You know, what is the reason that one feels so strongly about sticking with President Biden?
Well, ideology isn't the only thing you look at when you vote for president of the United States. Experience matters. Can you do the job? Can you be the leader of the free world? Are you going to
pause? Experience matters. Can you do the job? Do you guys believe Joe Biden can do the job right now? Doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like it. Ro Khanna knows that Joe Biden is in decline. We all see it. It's embarrassing. So the thing is this, like, can do the job. I would argue Joe Biden can't do the job. That would be my pushback, because he's trying to say ideology isn't the only thing. Okay.
be able to rally our allies? Do you know how to lead the military? Are you going to be able to build coalitions in the House and the Senate to get things?
Do you think Joe Biden can lead the military right now, guys? Because I don't think Joe Biden can lead the military right now.
Done. Are you going to be able to spearhead legislation? So yes, there's some of his challengers who I may agree with on Medicare for all or free public college. But when I look at who I think would be the best president overall, I believe that's Joe Biden.
Think about what he just said. He agrees with the colleagues that support Medicare for all, those progressive policies. But when he's looking at someone who will be best for the job, someone who can lead, he agrees with Joe Biden. To that I say, do what job, Khanna? Because if you agree with those progressive policies, part of the job should be him moving towards some of those progressive policies and trying to implement, especially the ones that he can do on by executive order, implement some of those policies. That would be part of the job. You see, this is why people like Khanna, actually, he's really good at this. People like Khanna, AOC stumbles a little bit. Elizabeth Warren, I think they tend to be really good at saying things that are like this general verbiage, but not really focusing on the specifics. And so they say things that sounds good in passing, but when you think about what their core beliefs are supposed to be, it doesn't match up. So for example, like I said, when he says can do the job, is going to do the job and lead the country, part of the job, if you believe in those progressive principles, would be for Joe Biden to move towards those types of policies, which he is not doing. And I get tired of people saying the Democratic Party has moved far left. The Democratic Party has moved further to the right. Joe Biden doesn't even want, what happened to the public option for health insurance? What happened to that? No public option. See how that just goes out the window?
You believe, you listed a number of things. It seems like Medicare for all, having universal health care for millions of Americans, and the richest country in the history of the world, where we're currently paying twice as much for healthcare costs than any other peer nation. And we have something called medical bankruptcy, and also 68,000 people before the pandemic dying every year from a lack of healthcare, is lower on the priority list than someone who can lead a military which many Americans on both sides of the aisle feel like should be led less, a military budget that we think should be cut. Many Americans think that should be cut significantly. Is it accurate to say that I've articulated your priorities?
That's a mischaracterization of my position. I was the only person on the Armed Services Committee, 1 out of 56, that people can look at, who voted against the military budget going to $1 trillion. And I've led on Medicare for all with Bernie Sanders. I'm going to be actually coming out with a bill with him on medical debt. But
let me stop here before he continues, because let me show you what he's trying to do. So he tends to do this a lot, where he talks about the way that he's voted, but he leaves out legislation where he's voted in the opposite way. So he voted against increasing the defense budget, but he voted for sending billions of dollars to Nazis in Ukraine. So it's just, it's things like that. I'm leading the way with Medicare for all, but I'm telling people to vote against the candidates that are running on Medicare for all. It's just stuff like that. That's all.
person on the Armed Services Committee, 1 out of 56, that people can look at, who voted against the military budget going to $1 trillion. And I've led on Medicare for all with Bernie Sanders. I'm going to be actually coming out with a bill with him on medical debt. But it is giving people false hope to say that someone can just run on that and then get things done. What we need is people who are going to run on that and actually get co-sponsors, push for a hearing, as Pramila Jayapal and I have, as Bernie Sanders would have. The reason I supported Bernie Sanders is that he was in the House and he was in the Senate. It wasn't just that he was taking these positions. He knew, I had full confidence that Bernie Sanders had become president that he would have been able to actually get these things done. And I don't believe you can just run for president without having any prior experience in the federal system and be effective.
Some people would disagree with you with that, Rokana, because the thing is, if we look at Donald Trump's presidency, although I don't agree with a lot of the things that Donald Trump did, some of his base would tell you that Donald Trump was effective in getting things done. I may not have agreed with what he got done, but that was someone who did not have experience in politics. He was not in the House. He was not in the Senate. And he still got things done, whether we agreed with what he got done or not. So for Rokana to say that in order to get those things done, you need to have that type of experience, we've already seen that's not necessarily the case. So I disagree with that statement that he made there. Let me go back just a little bit, sorry.
Bernie Sanders had become president, that he would have been able to actually get these things done. And I don't believe you can just run for president without having any prior experience in the federal system and be effective. I don't. Bernie Sanders had a lot of that experience.
And what do you say to those who say, okay, well, I voted for Biden in 2020 because that was the pitch that was made. And in fact, what we've been hearing for the last 3 years is that to the extent that his agenda, core items of his agenda, promises that he made to Bernie Sanders of things he would fight for when Bernie Sanders dropped out very quickly in 2020 have not been actualized. For example, a $15 minimum wage, a policy so popular that Trump's Florida in 2020 voted for it with 60% of voters supporting that particular policy. The Build Back Better being bifurcated and largely stripped in its final incarnation. The Willow Project, the student debt issue, which we've already discussed, which you attribute its failure to the Supreme Court. If the argument is that Joe Biden wasn't able to effectuate any of those kinds of policies, big ticket items, big promises, canceling all HBCU debt, canceling $10,000 to $20,000 of student debt for all Americans, a $15 minimum wage, can you really argue that Joe Biden is able to get things done?
Oof.
Well, look, I said that we should have fired the Senate parliamentarian. I wish we had gotten the $15 wage, and I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post calling for that. I think the Willow Project was a terrible decision, $8 billion on public lands in Alaska for the largest oil drilling project on public lands.
But Joe Biden's doing a great job, though, Rokana. Isn't that what you said before? Let me tell you a little story about the Senate parliamentarian for those who may not be aware. You can fire the Senate parliamentarian. The last president I remember doing that was George W. Bush. He had some disagreements in the way that the Senate parliamentarian was voting on particular issues or making these decisions. And George W. Bush said, gotta go. Joe Biden can do the same thing. And this is what I said a year ago, that if he was really that frustrated with the way that the Senate parliamentarian has been acting when it comes to legislation and they are kind of the deciding vote, Joe Biden could simply just fire the Senate parliamentarian. The reality is the Senate parliamentarian is doing exactly what Joe Biden wants them to do. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema were doing exactly what Joe Biden wanted them to do. Remember, Joe Biden is not to the left, so to speak. If these people were so problematic, they would have been removed from some of these committees that they still sitting on. I didn't see Joe Manchin removed from any of these committees when he voted against these pieces of legislation that would have helped the American people during the time of the pandemic when people really needed that help. I didn't see Kyrsten Sinema removed from any of those committees when she voted against those key legislations. And the Senate parliamentarian is still sitting there in place, which is someone that he immediately could have fired. So again, I feel like this is all a game. I feel like these people, they do these things in a way to make it seem like they're really trying to fight. Some of them may really want to fight, but the reality is, when you can move these different chess pieces across the board and you are choosing only to move one piece instead of moving several pieces at the same time, it is because you choose to do so. So Joe Biden chose to do that. He chose to be least effective. And that is because, again, he is also answering to his donors and to the military industrial complex. And that's what this all leads back to. You have to follow the money. Ro Khanna knows that. That's why the Senate parliamentarian hasn't been fired. These people are doing exactly what they were put there to do. I don't believe any of this is a coincidence or an accident. They're doing what they were put there to do, and that's why they're still there.
It was a gut punch to climate activists. So, I am not saying that Joe Biden has been the perfect progressive president. I don't think he's been what Bernie Sanders would have been. But you have to look at the whole record, and he has gotten manufacturing jobs back. He has been one of the most pro-labor, pro-union presidents. He has stood up for reproductive rights. He has.
So they always want to bring up the labor thing. Every time they bring up the labor thing, guys, particularly to you, you always bring up that railroad strike. Because it's funny when people say Joe Biden's been the most pro-labor president. You crushed the potential of a railroad worker strike. And I believe, and I told you before, they were going to try to intervene when it came to the UPS workers. The UAW has a deadline to go on strike. I believe it is 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night. That if their needs aren't met, they're going to go on strike. I believe that is the deadline. I won't cover that story until whether or not they decide if they're going to go on strike. I don't want to get people's hopes up like I did last time with UPS. So I just want to say something that we have to keep into consideration here. When he was able to do so, to intervene with these strikes, he intervened. That's not pro-labor. And I think some of these people taking union money, because I've been thinking about this. Some of these people sitting back and is like, oh yeah, he's the most pro-labor president. We saw the ad that was from part of the teacher union. And some of you were in the chat and said, that's my union. I don't support this at all. And we're pushing back on it and said the people that were part of the union didn't have a say so. Like, are these people, the Democratic Party paying these people, or these people sending money to the Democratic Party? I'm gonna start thinking about these things, because it seemed like to me there's some backroom deals going on. There's some of these unions, are they giving money to the Democratic Party? Is the Democratic Party infiltrating these unions? I'm looking on Twitter and I'm seeing the president of the UAW, and it shows he's holding meetings with politicians in the Democratic Party. And I'm like, what is happening here? Why are politicians having a seat at the table in reference to union decisions? They don't need to be there. The United Auto Workers, if they want to decide to go on strike, why do they need to have Rashida Tlaib and other politicians show up at these meetings to talk to them? Talk to them about what? It's their job. Those politicians don't work for the UAW. Why are they showing up to these meetings? What are they telling these unions? And next thing you know, the strike is avoided. I'll let him finish.
In the railroad strike, though, Representative Khanna, the concern is that he's a man of contradictions. He says he's the most pro-labor president. He has not made forceful statements supporting the workers in the impending UAW strike, and he crushed the rail strike earlier this year in a moment that people thought was one of the most anti-union actions that they've seen in their lifetimes. And with all due respect, I hear you distinguishing yourself from Biden, and I credit your record. But unless you are going to run for president, which I think some people would really love to see, at the end of the day, the question is whether or not the arguments that are made in Joe Biden's favor about his ability to get things done hold up 3 years after the Democratic Party has largely made the case that Joe Biden is not Joe Biden's fault that he hasn't been able to fulfill many of his campaign promises.
Woof.
Well, I would say that Joe Biden has been more progressive than I expected.
Come on, man. See, you notice how he doesn't answer the question?
He is standing on labor. I think he is genuinely. He stood with Starbucks workers. He stood with Amazon workers. He's standing with UAW workers. Now, I think we need to be 100% with UAW workers. I mean, the big three have had $5 billion in stock buybacks. Where is that money going that they can't pay the workers more and they're getting tax subsidies? So obviously, you're going to hear a progressive like me, like Bernie Sanders, like others in the progressive caucus want a bolder, more populist economic message and stand clearer on climate and income inequality issues. That's why I supported Bernie Sanders. But in the context of the choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and in the context of his record, I would argue that it represents a shift of the Democratic Party more in the direction of Bernie Sanders than not, and we should build on that progress.
No, row, you all over the place. Row your boat. Because the thing is this. Let me show you some data, okay? Let me show you a little bit of data. Because when they talk about the economy, they like to talk about the child poverty rate and they like to talk about inflation. So check this out. Did you guys see this? Holy moly. Child poverty rate rose from an all-time low of 5.2% in 2021 to 12.4% in 2022, reflecting end of temporary child allowance and other programs. I'll make this bigger for you. You see this? Look, let's look at the data. Changes in child poverty by race and ethnicity. To be clear, this is the Supplemental Poverty Measure, SMP, which takes into account taxes / government benefits. Look at this, guys. Let me see if is it bigger when okay, good. Child supplemental poverty rates by race and Hispanic origin, 2009 to 2022. Look at this spike. Boom. 19.5%. 2022. You see this? That is for Hispanic. It says Hispanic, any race. 19.5. For African Americans, which is the yellow line, 17.8%. For Asian Americans, 9.9%. And for non-Hispanic white, 7.2%. First of all, regardless of the race, this should not happen in the wealthiest country in the world. But everyone's saying that the economy is great. We cut child poverty in half. See that? This is telling. And another thing I want to point out to you, for Black people, we are like 13, I think it's 13% of the population now. Some people say 12, some people say 13. 13% of the population. We are only 13% of the population, but the child poverty rate is 17.8%. Honey, let me tell you, make this make sense. Make it make sense. This is the thing I want people to see. When people talk about class and we talk about class and race and all this, this is what I was trying to tell you guys. When it comes to the majority, where non-Hispanic white are the majority in reference to demographics in the United States, 7.2% child poverty, still bad. But of course, white people have the least amount. Black people are only 13% of the population, higher up when it comes to child poverty. I believe she had one more piece here. Biggest 1 year increase on record. Here we go. Census announces SPM child poverty rate of 12.4% in 2022. Context from 1967 to 2021. The largest year-over-year increase in SPM child poverty rate was 10.7. We now easily have a record increase in child poverty. This is the piece they're not showing people. And people need to see this, because I've been trying to tell people, oh no, we cut child poverty in half. But you see what happened when they cut that short, when they ended the child poverty, they cut it short, it skyrocketed again. But it's never, they said this is the highest increase. So it's record increase. That is scary in the United States of America. At least 10 states this year have started to fill the void left by the end of the federal child allowance by creating or expanding their own state-level child tax credit programs. And this is the reason why some of these states started to implement the free lunch programs that we talked about, right? So when they cut that the child allowance, some of the states came in to pick up the slack. So Massachusetts were one of them. Maine, Idaho, California, Oklahoma. Minnesota means new or improved CTC. So Minnesota, New York, Vermont. You see? But guys, this is great that the states are doing this, but look at the gray states. That's a lot of states in this country where kids are left out. Billions for Ukraine, though. Billions for Ukraine. So these are the kind of things, when we start pushing back about why Joe Biden should not be president, these are the kind of things we need to show people, because this is just a hot mess. America chose to more than double the child poverty rate last year. We could choose differently. Whew. So that's one lie they continue to tell. The other one is inflation. Now, I mentioned this earlier today. I think it was today on Rising, one of those shows. I mentioned that this is another thing they're trying to be a little quiet about. And they keep saying inflation is at a record low. Inflation is up, boo. And I told you all you had to do was look at the prices. All you had to do was go to the grocery store and you would see it yourself. I go to the grocery store once a week because I mini shop. But so things don't go bad. But I mini shop. And so I can see the prices increase every week. But I'm going to keep it real. Inflation is back up. Listen to this. Ro Khanna's not going to tell you this when they talk about the economy.
New inflation numbers in the United States show that consumer prices rose 0.6% in August, with rising gas prices accounting for over half of that increase. Now, if you strip away the volatile food and energy prices, that's called core inflation, and that slowed to 4.3% from 4.7%, an indication that the Federal Reserve's 11 rate hikes are working their way through the economy. Rahel Solomon joins us now to break this down. This is the importance of not just looking at an annual number and comparisons that are made over a 12-month period, which actually showed inflation rising, but to look at the month on month, which continues this trend lower despite those rising fuel prices.
Exactly, Julia. This is a report that really indicates that the devil is in the details, as they say. So as you said, headline inflation did tick up a bit, largely in line with expectations, but ticking up to a level and at a rate that we haven't seen since June of 2022. But most of that was energy, as you pointed out. And that, of course, is because of what we're seeing with production cuts with.
Thank you, Jessica. He said midnight tonight is the deadline, the auto worker union leader. Okay, yes, midnight tonight. All right, I'll check for that then.
OPEC. That said, if you look at core inflation, which most economists believe is a better indicator of the path of inflation, you actually see a continued moderation, right? You see prices increase 0.3% on a monthly basis. That was a touch hotter than economists were expecting. But I can tell you that most of that was because of the continued rise in shelter, or as our international audience might think of, accommodation. So that continued to be the largest driver. We also saw airline fares, they ticked up. So that sort of contributed there too.
So people who are poor and working class, like when they mentioned the airline fares, to me, that was just kind of, I mean, if you poor, you ain't got money to take a plane right now. Like you just don't have money to buy a plane ticket. Like these are the kind of things I think people, maybe they do realize it. These are the kind of things I think sometimes need to be said. A lot of times, if you grow up poor or working class, whereas upper middle class people and wealthy people, they buy airline tickets, they take a plane. You get on the bus, you take the Greyhound, or you drive as a family in the car and your mom packs the food for everybody. She makes sandwiches for everybody. So you do that to save money so that you don't pay for the airline tickets. So it was interesting to me that they mentioned airline tickets here along with shelter, food, and car insurance. That did it for me. Okay. That did it for me. But shelter plus 7.3%, food plus 4.3%, and car insurance plus 19.1%.
You take a look over the last year or so, some of the biggest increases, shelter, accommodations, food, car insurance, those continue to rise. Energy prices, however, remember, Julia, a year ago, we were at sort of peak energy prices. And so take a look. Energy prices have fallen year over year. That is certainly good news. Although on a monthly basis, as I said, they're ticking back up. Used car prices have fallen. And on an annual basis, airline fares have also fallen.
Because people can't afford to buy no damn tickets. Look, guys, airline fares down 13.3% because people can't afford to buy plane tickets. Used cars down 6.6%. People can't afford to buy cars. That just, nah. I mean, look at how they phrase it. Yes, energy down. Yes, that's good for the environment. But again, like I told you before, until they end these wars and they stop the CO2 consumption and the methane gas, like this is nothing compared to the war damage to the climate. But it's just interesting to me. She's like, good news. These energy things, these energy prices are down, but she's not explaining why, because people can't afford to do it. Even when it comes to energy, down 3.6%, that's people not paying their light bill. Let's just keep it real.
The implications of this, Julia, could not be greater. Of course, the Fed meets exactly a week from now. We will hear from the Fed exactly a week from now. The expectation largely is that they will pause, at least for now, because despite what the headline shows, this is a report that suggests that perhaps that 11 rate hikes are starting to work. They are starting to sort of funnel through the system, and that perhaps that it is actually working. And so this appears to be a report that is largely in line with expectations and no major surprises.
Yes, like gas prices or petrol prices, to those that use that terminology, we're a long way from the peaks, and it's the same with inflation. So one can certainly say those rate hikes have.
But these politicians are telling you that the economy is doing great. What? What? Crazy times, man. Crazy times. So that is something I think that's interesting to see. So the next time you hear another politician, brag about that child poverty rate or brag about the inflation, just remember what I showed you tonight. Michelle says married means joint ownership, like Carrie's wife private jet. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Read fine print. Are those term limits retroactive? That's a good point, Roger. Multi-mind, Bay Area's a mess, Rose in denial. Bebel says, Sabby, yes, unions give big money to campaigns. There you go. Thank you, Roger. 11:59 p.m. tonight, Sab, in less than 2 hours, that is. That's right. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Zach. Christian Parenti wrote in detail about unions working directly with employers to find and fire employees who failed to submit to medical experimentation. JB, Sabs, my county, Orange County, has implemented free breakfast and lunch in our school district. It's not that way for the rest of Florida, though. Yeah, and some areas have done this by county and not by state. It's unfortunate. I wish they would do that for the entire state of Florida. Jessica said, Sabby, that union leader is on live now making some announcement. I'm going to check that in a second. Stu says used cars were still way cheaper in 2019. Stu's been keeping track. And thank you for the super chat, radical leftist extremists. My secret weapon against inflation is dumpster diving. Have you heard of it? I always find some awesome stuff. It's legal and donate most of it. I've heard of dumpster diving. Can't really dive in the dumpsters here, though. You might find some furry visitors that don't want you there. But there is this thing in Boston every year called Alston Christmas. For those of you who live here, you're probably familiar with it. Alston's a neighborhood in Boston. It's near Boston University and Boston College. So Alston Christmas is like when all of the students that live in the apartments, they're moving out and they put all of their furniture that they don't want on the sidewalk for free. And so if you just walk around Alston, like when the students move out, we're like, yay, it's Alston Christmas. They're moving out to school and stuff like that. You walk around Alston, you can find some things. Now, don't pick up furniture that has upholstery, though, because you don't want to get that type of furniture in the city because you could have bed bugs. But anything else like a desk, something that has a hard surface, not something that has, upholstery, because there might be little friends in there. Little bed bugs. Special announcement, you guys. This is coming up October 3rd. I saw this on Code Pink's page today on Twitter. Join us on October 3rd to hear Cornel West, Claudia De La Cruz, Medea Benjamin, Lee Camp, Eugene Pernier discuss the urgency of pursuing peace in Ukraine. So there's a rally, another peace rally, and that is October 3rd at 7 p.m. ET. True Reformer Building in Washington, D.C. This is sponsored by Code Pink, Answer Coalition, Peace in Ukraine, and Busboys and Poets. Again, that's featuring Cornel West, Claudia De La Cruz. I talked about her the other day. I told you she's running for president under PSL. Lee Camp, Medea Benjamin, and Eugene Perrier. And is that the guy? I think that's the guy from Breakthrough Media. I think that's the guy from Breakthrough Media. Anyway, October 3rd, it says you can RSVP to attend in person or online. And I hope, sometimes Twitter changes the link. Let's see what happens if I. Oh, okay. It's still there. I'll put the link in the chat. Whee! Peace in Ukraine. For those of you that can travel there, and for those of you that live in the area. Breakthrough News. Thank you. I thought that was him. Thank you so much for that. We need critical thinking. I wish I could go. I don't know if I can because it's on a Tuesday. That's the only thing. It's on a Tuesday. Yep. Tuesdays are tough for me. I know there was another Assange one that I wanted to go to, but I couldn't because it was on a Tuesday. These events are designed to educate, inspire, and mobilize people to action. We must get serious about this is tiny. No, already, there we go. We must get serious about putting this Congress and administration on notice that they must reverse their present course, which is taking us to the precipice of a nuclear confrontation. Instead, they must join us in calling for a ceasefire and negotiations to end this terrible conflict that is spinning out of control. And here are all the co-sponsors. There's more co-sponsors than I realized. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah. Check that out, guys. If you're in the area, October 3rd, 7 p.m., True Reformer Building, Washington, D.C., USA. Check that out, guys. All right. I always love these, like when these rallies are posted. Like I always try to announce them on here. If I miss one, let me know. But for the most part, I usually find them and I shout them out. But that's pretty much it. Let me go see what this guy is talking about. This union guy, the president, is talking about. I'll have to dive back into West Virginia ballot initiatives tomorrow night, but I want to check out what this union guy is talking about. Okay, let me pull up Rockfin. Sorry, go ahead, Eric. Let me see what he's saying. The chance to watch it online. Okay, yes, that's right. You can watch it online if you can't make it there, guys. Sorry about that. Thank you for the tip, Roger. According to the 2023 Out of Reach Project report, the poorest state in the U.S., Arkansas, suggested minimum wage is $16.27 an hour. So can we please kill the fight for 15 movement and replace it with 55 to keep me alive? Federal Chair Powell must go. Although Larry Summers' camp will say inflation was caused by the Fed printing money. No, the Fed caused it by hiking rates because workers were gaining leverage in the workplace. Move chess pieces across the board. Oh, you know how to play chess now. Busted. When can I get a game? Okay, I'm not an expert at chess. I've watched a couple of things. So I think I know enough to get by. Let's just put it that way. But Roger's been trying to challenge me to a chess game. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me and hanging out with me tonight. I do have a special guest tomorrow. I'm not going to announce it. It will be a surprise. You'll find out tomorrow. But other than that, guys, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.